started, some preliminary announcements. The First District Court of Appeals has graciously lets us use their facilities, so please respect their rules and have absolutely no food or beverage other than water in this room, and please silence your cell phones. We've received some feedback from the public that sometimes it's difficult to hear the members and those before the commission, both in the room and over live stream. So anyone addressing the commission, please make sure to speak up and speak into the long microphone at the podium so you can be heard, and so our broadcast audio and recording equipment can pick up your comments. So my fellow commission members, please speak up and into the long microphones so that your comments and debate can be heard. I ask you to be as brief and concise as possible in your comments and questions today, as we have a number of items for consideration. Pursuant to Section 286.0114 Florida statutes, members of the public have the opportunity to have input on matters before the commission other than in cases in which we act in a quasi-judicial capacity. This means the public can have input on matters other than complaints, opinions, and determinations in final disclosure cases. If you desire to be heard on a matter, please fill out a speaker card and give it to Ms. Fulford in the back who has her hand up. All right, first agenda item is, third agenda item is approval of the minutes from our public session meeting on July 26, 2024. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on to the reports. The first time I've ever actually given a chair's report, my last opportunity to do so, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Commissioner Bain, the newest member of the commission.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And then also wanted to recognize former Commissioner Cervone, who's obviously not up here with us today. Had we known that last meeting, I think was his last meeting, we would have made some more fanfare, but we thank him for his service and all of the wonderful input that he had during his time on the commission. So if he's watching. And
Watching from home.
I'll turn it over to Carrie now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Normally, we do these reports at the end of the meeting, but there are a couple of special things that we wanted to do. We're going to kick off today's meeting to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Commission. When the ethics laws were enacted first in about 1967, there was an in-house approach to enforcement. Various boards and agencies would investigate their own employees and officials. The concern, of course, was that personnel could not be impartial in their investigations of their own colleagues. Penalties were from dismissal of employment to removal from office, or no penalty at all. Given the limited penalties, the legislature enacted criminal penalties for violating ethics laws in 1970. So the early 70s, of course, brought us Watergate, but in Florida, a U.S. senator was indicted by a federal grand jury. 3 of the 6 members of Florida's cabinet, including the lieutenant governor, were charged with various forms of misconduct in office, and 3 members of the Florida Supreme Court were faced with charges of official wrongdoing. So there was a crisis of confidence in Florida government. Governor Ruben Askew, Speaker Terrell Sessoms, and Senate President Mallory Horn, who would later serve on the Ethics Commission, took action. The legislature took a 3-pronged approach to restore the public's confidence in its government: financial disclosure, standards of conduct, and administrative enforcement. Robert M. Rhodes, who was an assistant to the Speaker of the Florida House, wrote an article wherein he argued that enforcement committees external to the legislature would provide the strongest potential for impartial and objective administration of the ethics codes. So enter the Florida Commission on Ethics. It was established during the 1974 legislative session. Its first members were appointed in June of that year, and the commission opened its office doors in room 301 of the Holland Building in August of 1974. Out on a table in the rotunda is a picture of the commission members for that first ethics commission, along with its 3 staffers. Larry Gonzalez was the first executive director of the commission, and he served until about 1987. Bonnie Williams was his deputy, and Jen Ballard was the commission's administrative assistant. Bonnie went on to serve for many years as the executive director from about 1987 until her retirement in mid-2000s. You might recognize some of the distinguished members of that first commission. It was former Governor Leroy Collins, former Supreme Court Justice E. Harris Drew, Charlotte Hubbard, W. George Allen, James Pletz, Sandy Dalembert, John Grant, Lois Harrison, and John D. Rawls. The first standards related to ethics were business relationships, voting conflicts, and conflicting employment relationships, which are still on the books today. It's fascinating to go back and look at the annual reports from when the commission was in its infancy. They were trailblazers, pushing for reforms by advocating for adding additional standards of conduct for public officers and employees, strengthening financial disclosure laws, and creating mechanisms for uniformity of disclosure in the state, and also recommending that lobbyists register to lobby. The legislature amended the statutes to add standards related to gift disclosure, misuse of office, and use of inside information within the first couple of years of the commission's existence. The commission actually issued over 200 formal advisory opinions in 1975 alone, and had to utilize law students to assist with the drafting of those opinions because they had such a small staff. As you might imagine, during that time, there were numerous court challenges to the laws and cases that came before the commission, and of course, resistance to financial disclosure. The commission also had to work to improve its authority as it related to investigations, because early on, the investigations were referred to an agency or the person who had disciplinary authority over the respondent. If they refused to investigate, only then could the commission investigate. And due to the narrow construction of the commission's jurisdiction, it only investigated 4 out of 63 complaints received in its first year. Then the commission had to wait their turn to utilize investigators in the Attorney General's office. And here we sit 50 years later, continuing the work that began in 1974. Over the years, bipartisan commissions have issued more than 2,000 formal opinions to officials seeking guidance. Thousands of complaints have been investigated and public reports issued. Members now, just like in 1974, are not compensated for their service. Commission members have included citizens from all walks of life: doctors, lawyers, retirees, teachers, pastors, rabbis, and business owners, and they've generously volunteered their time in service of this agency's mission. Over time, as the needs of the agency have required, the staff has grown from 3 to more than 20 service-minded employees. The reputation of the agency is what it is because the members and staff have worked together to protect the public trust and to provide guidance to public officials and employees across the state. The work of the commission to objectively investigate and determine the facts surrounding the conduct of public officials and public employees and issue public reports continues to be its greatest responsibility, providing the accountability and transparency that democracy demands. So today we celebrate our 50 years of service as an agency and honor the commissioners and staff who rolled up their sleeves and got to work 50 years ago in the Holland Building, as well as the many commissioners and staff who have picked up the mantle along the way as the guardians of the public trust. So at the conclusion of today's public session meeting, we invite anyone who is here to join us for some cake in the rotunda as a humble celebration of the commission's anniversary. So thank you all for continuing to serve. With that, are we ready for e-filing, everyone? I know. We have now, speaking of additional standards, we have now moved into the electronic age, and September 3rd was the grace period for the deadline to file disclosure without accruing an automatic fine, unless the filer sought an extension. As of September 3rd, our compliance rate was 96.33%. We had 99.28% compliance with Form 6s, excluding judges. We have 96.22% overall Form 1 compliance, with state filers sitting at 98% and local filers at a little over 95%. Since September 3rd, individuals have continued to file disclosures, even though they're late, because we have continued to try to reach them to inform them that they needed to do so. As of yesterday, close of business, our total compliance rate was 97%. So out of nearly 40,000 filers, 992 have not yet filed. Overall, Form 1 compliance is almost 97% now, and Form 6 is at nearly 99.5%. We continue to work to get folks to file by calling, contacting their coordinators, sending weekly emails, and also next week we will double down by sending folks a letter to let them know that they are in fact accruing a fine as we speak and that they need to file. So last year, by comparison, overall our compliance rate was 98.5%, with Form 1 filers at 98% and state filers at 99%, as well as Form 6 filers at 99.5%. And remember, Form 6 was already electronic last year. So we're running a little bit behind last year's compliance level. However, when we embarked on this electronic filing journey into this year with everybody coming in, I thought if we hit 95% compliance, we could be pretty proud of that, particularly with the local filers who had so much change in terms of where they file and how they file. Obviously, 100% is always the goal, and ultimately, we expect to be able to get back to that 98 or 99% compliance overall. But we're pretty happy that this is a good start, and we're now in the process of reviewing our first full electronic filing season to see what worked and what we can improve. The disclosure information for electronically filed Form 1 and Form 6 filers are now required to be posted online because they're electronically filed. Form 6 disclosures have been published for over a decade, and prior to e-filing, we were scanning the paper forms and then posting the disclosures. However, this is the first year for Form 1 disclosures to be published, and that was a big change. In the past, the form itself contained the mailing addresses of the filer, which was printed on the form, but given that the mailing address is now provided to us as a part of their profile so that we can contact them, and it's not required on the disclosure, although the mailing address remains a public record, it's no longer going to be posted with the e-filed forms on our website. So in terms of fines and appeals, in the past, fine assessments and appeals did not occur until the next calendar year at the earliest because we had to wait for delinquency certifications from local supervisors of elections. But this year, because all filers are filing with the commission, we are assessing fines as folks file their disclosure late. Those assessments are being handled every couple of days and each week because we've already started to receive fine payments. The fining process is not inside the electronic system yet. It's still a manual process, but that's the next phase. So next year it will be automated. They'll submit their disclosure, and if it's late, they'll get a notice that they've been fined, and we're looking forward to the automation of that. We're also phasing out our call center. Their work with us will end next week. We reduced the number of call center reps a couple weeks ago due to the lower call volume. They continue to receive calls about Form 1 and assist those filers, but they're spending a lot of time calling those who have not yet filed as well, and that's been a savings of time to us. I recently spoke to a town official who expressed his appreciation for the reminder calls and the service-oriented culture of the commission staff and especially its staff attorneys. We'd much rather place reminder calls than to fine someone. Compliance and transparency is the goal. So we'll be meeting with our call center folks to get some metrics and as we figure out what to do next year. You'll recall at the last meeting, I recognized some of the IT team who worked so hard on the e-filing system. Today, thanks to the chair, I have some folks here from our staff who you don't normally see because I want to recognize the people on our staff who have worked so hard to make this season happen with disclosure. So I'm going to start with some of our administrative support staff. Jeremy Pennington is our executive secretary. He is first on phones and could not join us because somebody has to be back at the office to handle calls that come in. But Jeremy is the epitome of calm, cool, and collected on the phones, and we're thankful that even when the temperature of the office is going up, we can count on Jeremy to be able to assist people calmly. We have part-time clerks, Emma and Rachel. They're college students who have been thrown into the fire and learned how to answer a number of disclosure procedural questions and get callers the assistance they needed with minimal wait times. You're familiar with Diana Westbury, who is our official commission secretary and does the minutes. She's also our office manager, but during disclosure season, it's an all-hands-on-deck scenario, and she also pitches in with troubleshooting login issues and Form 1 calls, redacting disclosures. Kathy Steverson is my assistant. She's seated over there with Diana. She wears many hats, and she is someone that we can always count on to assist with any issue, but she was particularly helpful this year with password resets and redactions and monitoring the numerous email boxes that we have. Lynn Blaze, our chief administrator, she is not here today, but she supervises the support staff, and you know she's our resident IT brain. She troubleshoots any IT issues that you all have. But she used to work in financial disclosure, so her disclosure experience coupled with her IT brain helped us really bridge the gap, and she really did a great job of kind of thinking from the filer perspective when we were thinking out what this might look like. She spearheaded our ticket tracking system so that we could resolve issues in a timely fashion, and so we really appreciate her relentless pursuit of solutions for staff and filers, for her trying to break the system during testing. She assisted Kim with testing the system when we were putting fixes out and enhancements, and it wouldn't have worked as well without her. But now for our actual disclosure staff, and we are really proud of them. Our disclosure team is only 3 people. They're a small group, but they're mighty, and they're headed up by Kimberly Holmes, who's seated to the left here, and I'm going to talk about her in a minute. But first, I want to talk about her awesome team, Emily Prine, who could not be with us today, and Kiana Green. Kiana put out a wave. You don't normally see Kiana here, and I'm so glad that she was able to join us. They work in our disclosure corner with Kim, and we don't see much of them during financial disclosure season because they come in a side door, sit down at their desk, usually early, and hit the ground running. They are on the phone all day long, answering hundreds, if not thousands, of emails this disclosure season, and it's not for the faint of heart. And not everyone who calls is pleasant, believe it or not, but I can always depend on Kiana and Emily to be service-minded and be patient, and by the time they end up finished speaking with someone, they're generally a fan. So thank you so much, Kiana, for sticking with the program and for being somebody we can count on each and every day during this busy time, but 365 days a year when you do disclosure. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about Kim. She's quiet and mighty, our disclosure administrator. She's the queen of all things disclosure. She minds the details. Her expertise, countless work hours, and the great care with which she approached this project is why issues were often spotted and fixed before filers experienced a problem. She has so much disclosure information stored in her memory. She has taught me so much, and she often has instant recall of hundreds of situations involving filers and EFDMS. We can always count on her to remember something that was discussed in a meeting, whether it was 2 days ago or 2 years ago, and she can always have the right answer for disclosure. She is the keeper of receipts, so to speak. If you want to know who said what about something, she has an email on it where it's documented. Hundreds of messages, she would always max out her voicemail, and I get emails from her late at night. So Kim, thank you for your persistence, your honesty, and for being willing to let people know when they needed to listen to you, when maybe you thought you weren't being heard. It always pays to listen to Kim because she's always right when it comes to disclosure. So thank you so much to the staff members, to our lawyers who in the midst of this were handling all the Form 6 things. I'm very, very proud of the work we've done so far and look forward to the rest of the way as we as we bring it in for a landing. Next year will be easier. And that concludes my e-filing report. They're going to get much shorter from here, I promise. So, thank you. A round of applause.
Commissioner Newton, did you?
Madam, I just had a question about the call center. I know we approved, there was questions, we were approving the money for it that was budgeted. But I'm just curious as to, with the volume, how much was actually used? Did we stay under it, did we go over it?
I will, we are going to be under it because we reduced
Okay.
the number of call center folks. I don't have that number with me, but I can give it to you
Yeah.
as we wind it down. I will.
I know it was our first time at bat, we was on that Zoom, there was a lot of concern about, do we need it, how much it would cost? And I was just curious as to, we beefed it up to try to handle it. I mean, I'm just curious as to what that looked like.
Right. Anecdotally around the office, we know that each and every call that they handle was one that we did not have
Correct.
to take.
Correct.
And they did handle thousands of calls. They have been making hundreds of calls, reminder calls as well, so we've been looking to keep them busy. But at the next meeting, I'll
Thank you.
I know I've asked this question 100 times, but at the right time, I know it's too soon now, and maybe it's in a report from you, or will somebody from the vendor, give us a sort of a full debrief on the stats? I think that would be helpful, just given some of the questions that we had going into it, and I know a huge thing that I think got us all on board, or at least a lot of us on board, was the idea that there would be metrics. So I think we're all interested to hear those.
be happy to do
At the
that.
right time, I know that it's very premature still.
We're debriefing next week with
Great.
them, so hopefully by then.
Wonderful. Before we move on, are there any other comments or questions on the e-filing report? Well, thank you again to all the staff, and cheers to the end of disclosure season, for now.
Indeed.
All right, moving on to, item number 5 was continued to the October meeting, so we'll jump straight to item number 6, which is consideration of an advisory opinion in file 2812. So any public officer, candidate for public office, or public employee in Florida who's in doubt about the applicability of disclosure laws or standards of conduct to himself or herself, or anyone who has the power to hire or terminate another public employee, may seek an advisory opinion from the commission about himself, herself, or that employee. Advisory opinions are based solely on the facts provided by the requester and are legally binding on the conduct at issue. Is the requester in file 2812 here?
Heather Lindsay here? Oh, okay.
Oh, why would you? I apologize. Could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Of course. Good morning, Madam Chair and members and staff. Heather Lindsay, I'm the mayor of the city of Milton.
Thank you for being here. Steve, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you've already heard, the requester for this, Heather Lindsay, she is here today to speak on this after me if she wants to, or if you have questions for her. Giving credit where credit is due, I didn't work alone on this. I did get substantial assistance, maybe I didn't even put in my fair share on this, but our law clerk, Amelia, helped out substantially, so giving credit where credit is due, I did want to acknowledge her. Commissioners, this opinion request comes to us from Heather Lindsay. She is the mayor of Milton, and according to her inquiry, the other members of the city council voted to authorize the city attorney to file a lawsuit against her. The lawsuit alleges violations of the public records law. Mayor Lindsay has hired an attorney to defend her, and her legal expenses currently exceed $20,000. In her inquiry, Mayor Lindsay proposes 2 ways to obtain funds to pay her legal fees. First, Mayor Lindsay asks whether she can take loans from her friends. The loans will either be interest-free or will be at rates that are below the market rate. She specifies that her friends are not vendors or lobbyists of the city, and they are not the principals of lobbyists of the city either. Second, Mayor Lindsay asks for guidance on administrating a fundraising effort on the GoFundMe.com platform. The draft analyzes both scenarios under the gifts law, which is found in section 112.3148 of the Florida statutes. The gifts law has several requirements. Relevant to the loans from Mayor Lindsay's friends, the gifts law requires that reporting individuals must disclose all gifts exceeding $100 in value from donors who are not relatives, vendors, or lobbyists of her agency, or the principals of lobbyists of her agency. A reporting individual is someone who is required to file financial disclosure. Mayor Lindsay, as the mayor of Milton, is required to file financial disclosure, so she is a reporting individual who is subject to the requirements of the gifts law. The Code of Ethics defines a gift in section 112.312, subsection 12. The definition includes examples of what is and is not a gift, and conveniently, the list of examples of what constitute a gift includes a preferential rate on a loan. So, the draft informs Mayor Lindsay that a preferential rate on the loans that she will be receiving from friends who are not relatives, vendors or lobbyists of her agencies, or principals of lobbyists of her agency will be a gift, and that such a gift must be disclosed if its value exceeds $100. The Commission has not before addressed in its rules or in its prior opinions how to value a preferential rate on a loan. In most cases, gifts are valued at the cost to the donor, and for that reason, the draft states that the value of the preferential rate is, quote, the difference between the total interest that will be paid through the life of the loan that the reporting individual actually accepted and the total interest rate that would be paid through the life of an unsecured personal loan of the same loan amount at a contemporary, commercially available, fair market interest rate. Relevant to the GoFundMe issue, the gifts law states that a reporting individual cannot solicit any gift from a vendor or lobbyist of their agency or the partner, firm, employer, or principal of a lobbyist of their agency. This is called the solicitation ban. It is a total ban on soliciting gifts from these entities or individuals. In addition to the solicitation ban, there is also an acceptance ban in the gift law. The acceptance ban prohibits a reporting individual from knowingly accepting a gift valued more than $100 from a vendor or lobbyist of their agency or the partner, firm, employer, or principal of a lobbyist of their agency. With regard to the solicitation ban, the draft states that Mayor Lindsay cannot merely publish a general public request for donations on the GoFundMe.com platform because, as this board has said in its opinions and in its final orders, a general solicitation is considered to be a solicitation of the prohibited sources. Consistent with an opinion that the Commission issued just last year, the draft advises Mayor Lindsay to explicitly state in her fundraising statement that the prohibited sources cannot contribute to the fundraising campaign. By making it clear that she does not want the prohibited sources to donate to the fundraising campaign, she may solicit all other allowable sources of gifts without offending the solicitation ban. If a vendor or a lobbyist of the city or a partner firm, employer, or principal of the lobbyist of the city does nonetheless donate to the fundraising campaign, the acceptance ban would prohibit Mayor Lindsay from accepting the donation if it exceeds $100. The last thing of note in this opinion is the discussion on anonymous donations to the GoFundMe fundraising campaign. Mayor Lindsay asked what should she do if she receives an anonymous donation. The draft cites to our rule requiring a recipient of the gift to make a reasonable inquiry into the identity of the donor. Information on GoFundMe's website seems to indicate that the identity of a donor is not anonymous to the person who has set up the GoFundMe fundraising campaign. So with that in mind, the draft advises Mayor Lindsay that she must undertake an effort, including consultation with the administrator of the GoFundMe.com fundraising campaign, to learn the identity of all of the anonymous donors. The advice on anonymous donors stops there because the guidance from GoFundMe indicated that the donor identity information was always available. Since the time that we circulated this opinion, this draft opinion to you 2.5 weeks ago, our staff has been involved in another project requiring some research on crowd-funded fundraising. What we've learned on that other project is that there is actually a really clever way to thwart the crowdfunding campaign's tools for identifying its donors. I don't want to get into what that is here, but it is possible to do, so I do want to add another paragraph to the draft that would acknowledge the possibility. Essentially, what I would like to do at the conclusion of where we're discussing the anonymous donors, I'd like to acknowledge that the acceptance ban prohibits the knowing acceptance of a gift from a prohibited source, and that if Mayor Lindsay does what the rule requires and makes a reasonable inquiry into the donation, and it is in fact a truly anonymous donation, she may accept the gift. We had an opinion that we did in 1989. Obviously, GoFundMe was not around back then. But in 1989, we did an opinion regarding a mayor who was retiring, and the city took up a collection to fix his truck as a retirement gift. And it looks like the bookkeeping on what the donations were not clean, and it was not really clear at the end who donated, how much they donated. None of that was kept track of. And so the mayor wrote in to ask, what do I do now? And what we told the mayor in that opinion is he needs to investigate who donated what to the extent that he can. And for any donations to the fund to fix his truck that were truly anonymous, where he did not have the knowledge, because the acceptance ban only bans a knowing acceptance of a gift over $100 from prohibited sources, if it's truly anonymous, he may accept the gift. What we told him to disclose in that instance, because it's a gift over $100, is, quote, the name of the group, organizations, or persons who were responsible for coordinating the collection of the money. That should be disclosed. So I would like to reiterate that advice in the opinion in the instance where it is in fact a truly anonymous donation where Mayor Lindsay, after making a reasonable inquiry, does not have knowledge of who the donors are. And I would make that paragraph very explicit so that there isn't it can't be mistaken for what the advice truly is. The draft closes with some cautionary language concerning the gift being intended, concerning gifts that might be intended to influence the mayor's decision-making. There's nothing in her inquiry, which is at this point hypothetical. There's nothing in her inquiry to indicate that she's being offered any gifts that would be intended to influence her decision-making. Nonetheless, I provide the cautionary language in there about bribes and unauthorized compensation just to provide her with the full spectrum of guidance on accepting things of value from people. And with that, I am available to answer any questions that you may have on the draft. And of course, Mayor Lindsay is also here if you want to ask her any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, first, Commissioner Newton.
Thank you. Steve, what about in-kind? Is that considered in-kind? Like someone wants to just, I guess, give her some legal advice, counsel, or whatever. Is that included in that, or how does that work?
Yes, sir. Through the chair, in-kind gifts to a person are considered to be gifts. The definition of a gift includes anything of value, and it includes in-kind services. We also have a rule that evaluates in-kind services, and the valuation of an in-kind service would be the rate at which it would be commercially available. So, for example, if somebody power washed your home for free, it would be, the value of that would be what it costs to get your home power washed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ankers?
Thank you for the opinion and the work that went into it. I wondered if you considered prohibiting the anonymous donations based on the law, which I understand says a knowing violation or a knowing gift that exceeds the threshold amount. But it seems to me that's a very easy way for people to circumvent the law, not that the acceptor would intentionally be doing it, but the donor could.
Yes. Through the chair, I've lost a lot of sleep over that very issue.
Well, good, that makes me good.
Because I'm concerned about it. I know the other staff in the office are also concerned about it as we've kicked it around. Why I've landed on this very difficult piece of advice is for a couple reasons. One, it requires a knowing, in order for us to find that somebody has has violated the prohibition, they need to have knowingly accepted something from a prohibited source. What the opinions process is meant for is it's meant to give these people, the public officers and public employees, it's meant to give them compliance advice to keep them on the right side of everything. We would sometimes like to express in our opinions what we think people should do to protect the public trust, and sometimes that's in excess of what the law does require. And so it's a fine line for us to walk as we're drafting these. If we were to ban or advise Mayor Lindsay that she cannot accept any anonymous donations because some of those might be from prohibited sources in actuality, regardless of the knowledge that she might have on who the actual donor is, I think that would be an overbroad prohibition, because I think the universe of anonymous gifts, only a subset of that are going to be, if any, are going to be anonymous gifts from prohibited donors. The rest of them are technically gifts that she would be allowed to accept. And so I worry about whether a court would say that we were being overbroad in our guidance on something like that. So that's why I came up with the advice that in the draft that I've written, I would propose here today. But if you wanted to go in a different direction, it is your prerogative to do that, and I'd be happy to write it in the new draft. But that's not my recommendation.
I might ask you to revisit the proposed language, because that's what snagged me.
Sure.
I was okay with the language in the draft because it allows the identification, at least by the beneficiary, of the donor. So that was the safety valve. But with
Yeah.
that removed, even someone who intentionally was trying to thwart her and cause her to violate the ethics because they are fitting within that subset, a vendor, for example, who says, I'll get her, this is what I'll do, seems like it might not necessarily be overbroad, but simply protective.
I can't, it's hard for me to disagree with that perspective.
But will you revisit that one previous advice that we gave that dealt with this issue, and that in a previous opinion?
Yeah, the previous opinion did not address purely anonymous. It wasn't an anonymous donation situation, and that was not really an issue that had come up in the, oh, you're talking about the 89 opinion?
The one that is the basis for your additional language.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. So, I mean, the way to distinguish that opinion would be to say the world has changed since 1989, and necessarily what was happening in 1989 was an in-person, person-to-person collection occurred, and the identities are known to somebody. And but what's happening in the GoFundMe world is there is a disjoinder between, where it's not interpersonal. And if you wanted to distinguish the 89 opinion on that basis, I think that such a thing probably could be written. But I think that's what would need to be, that's what would need to occur.
Thank you.
I have two questions. My first question is, if this is a loan that's not a fair market value, how would this be considered a gift?
Sure. The loan itself, through the chair, the loan itself is not a gift because the loan is intended to be repaid back. What the gift is the value that this person is getting that they are not repaying, which is the preferential rate. So if I receive a loan from Gray and I repay the loan, the loan itself is not the gift. I'm not reporting that. But because I've not paid any interest to him, and I would if I had to go to any other entity, that is the gift to me. That's the value that the donor of the loan is giving to me, is that I don't have to pay any interest, or that I'm paying far less interest than I would otherwise pay if the favor was not being done to me. And that's truly what it is, a preferential rate. It's a favor that's being done, and it has monetary value that's quantifiable.
Okay, so the loan is not a problem. Now, going to the GoFundMe, if there was a political committee that set up a legal defense fund for her, and she doesn't solicit the funds, is that still prohibited?
If a I'm sorry, Commissioner, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. If a political committee sets up the legal defense fund for the mayor and then donates the money to the mayor?
The political committee does it to pay the legal defense fund. Would that still be prohibited, even though she didn't solicit for it?
A gift from a political committee actually implicates, there's a whole other law that gets implicated from that. Section 112.31485 of the Florida statutes would say that it has a different definition of what a gift is, and in that statute, the definition of a gift is anything that would not be considered to be an allowable contribution under Chapter 106. And so, as I stand here before you today, I'm not an expert on Chapter 106 or election financing laws. So I wouldn't know if that was or wasn't allowable under Chapter 106. Let's assume that it was. If it's allowable under Chapter 106, then we analyze it under the gifts law. As I said, the gifts law has a different definition. But one of the things that it says is, in the acceptance ban, section 112.314.8 sub 4, it says a reporting individual, procurement employee, or other person on his or her behalf is prohibited from knowingly accepting, directly or indirectly, a gift from, and then it lists a bunch of different entities, and it includes a political committee as defined in section 106.011. So the political committee, being the donor to her GoFundMe or other legal defense fund, would not be able to donate more than $100 because she would be prohibited from accepting that.
Commissioner
What's the
Gaskin.
political committee? Because I have the same thought, what if it's her friend that wants to crowdsource for her, brings in $20,000 through their GoFundMe, you can do that. The only donor now is Judy, her friend, that's giving her $20,000. But now you have, she could have 200 people that, all of those types of people could be in it. It's like, how do we care about that? Do we pitch that? Do we pursue that?
I feel like there were a couple of different questions in there. The first question was, what is a political committee? Was that?
No, I know
Oh,
what a political committee is.
no.
His question was about a political committee. I'm talking about a friend, Susie, who just as a private citizen sets up a GoFundMe and says, my friend is in trouble, I want to raise money for her.
Yeah.
And 200 people donate. It could be anonymous, there could be vendors, contractors, employees, all kinds of people who go in there and donate to that. But the only disclosure, I think, would be her friend, whoever I call her, Judy or whoever. Her friend would be the only, my friend Judy gave me $20,000.
No, through the chair. No, Commissioner, I want to make sure I'm very clear on that point. And that is essentially what you're asking is the question that Mayor Lindsay is asking in the inquiry, which is, it looks like a friend has offered to set up a GoFundMe for her. And what we're advising her is, because she has to disclose gifts that she's accepted directly or indirectly, these would be a gift from an original source that's meant for Mayor Lindsay and is only being funneled through the friend. The donor on that is the original source. She would need to disclose the original source. If it's not a prohibited source, she would list those people by name on Form 9. If it is a prohibited source and the gift value is over $100, she can't accept it in the first place. And what we've done in this draft is we've put the responsibility of figuring out who's who on Mayor Lindsay, because the liability for compliance ultimately lies with her.
Commissioner Brewster.
Through the chair, Steve, what's 112.314A subsection 6? No, I'm just kidding, only because you're rattling them out. You're rattling them out, I'm like, okay, no.
I believe it's the requirement
No,
for
no,
Form
I'm
2.
not- My question is, the $100 mark, how old is it statutorily?
The 100, oh my goodness, I think if I had to, it's at least the 90s or before.
And then that's a cup of coffee back in Miami. But my other question is,
Right in there, right your finger.
you're presuming that the preferential rate is a gift, and I'm just wondering, I mean, there's many lenders out there, right? You have institutional lenders, you have private lenders. Why is it that the preferential rate is automatically, I mean, forgiveness of a loan obviously is an income, that's a gift. But the preferential rate banks and establishments set their rates based on their overheads, based on the prime, based on a number of factors, but I don't think private individuals have those structures for expenses. So if I want to give her a loan, let's say at 4%, because 4% return on my money is not bad. Better than, let's say, the market, well, not by now, but I'm just saying in general, why is it that it's automatically presumed that that's a gift? Because if I end up going to a car dealership and I can negotiate a car at $2,000 down, is that $2,000 spread considered a gift, or is it just indication of my ability to negotiate the price down?
Right. So, through the chair, this is a great question. I want to be clear on what I'm doing here. I'm not presuming that the preferential rate is a gift. It's written directly into the definition of a gift in the statute that a preferential rate is a gift. What then I must do, and what is new here, is not that the preferential rate is a gift, but we do have to come up with a valuation method, because she needs to figure out if the value of the preferential rate does or doesn't exceed 100, so she knows if she needs the Form 9 in the first place or not. And if she does need the Form 9, she does need to list the exact value of the gift. So what I proposed to do in the draft, and you are welcome to propose a different valuation method, I proposed to do in the draft was to evaluate the gift at what she's actually paying in interest, subtracted from what she could get in the marketplace for a loan of the same amount commercially at a fair market arm's length transaction. So, mileage is going to vary on things like that, and those things are negotiated, but it's the best that you can do. And in some respects, it's not all that different from the power washing example that we came up with earlier, where the price of the power washing is going to be different across the board, but you need to put something down on the form. And so the burden is going to be on the person who's filling out the form to do the research to put down a reasonable number there.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. Is there a bank rate, rather than just say the fair market rate that you might get? That's vague. I'm concerned that that's vague, and concerned that it would lead the mayor subject to an attack by somebody as to, well, this is what one bank is offering, this is what another bank is offering. Is there a particular rate that you can point to, or a particular institution that you can point to that would provide better clarity?
As I stand here right now, I'm certainly open to suggestions from all of you, but we could either devise a number, or we could point to prime, or something along those lines. We don't necessarily do that for some of the other things in the valuation method. For example, when we evaluate, when somebody takes a charter flight, according to our rule, the valuation of a seat on a charter flight is the price of a seat, an unrestricted coach seat of on an airplane. And so the cost of an unrestricted coach seat is going to vary on all sorts of factors if you've bought airline tickets in the last 20 years. So we don't get to that level of granularity on some of the other gifts, and I think that kind of frees up the filer to not stress so much on that. But what we're trying to do here, the whole purpose of the Form 9 is to get something down on the form so that the public is aware of what was received and what the value of the thing was.
And would there be a reason why you couldn't cite to like the Bank of America prime rate?
I could easily do that, and I'd be fine writing something like that down.
Back to the GoFundMe, that's where I want to get some clarity. Now, because anyone can contribute to that from anywhere. I know we're prohibited as former state rep from getting anything outside of the continental U.S. Does it speak to that? As far as donations, we can't take anything outside of the U.S. knowingly, but to send it back.
Right, I believe that's what you're referring to as a campaign finance law. The gifts law does not impose any limitations on that because people they're free to receive gifts from anywhere with only the limitation that the sources not be particular individuals or entities as I've outlined.
Also, on the bottom of page 7, I'll just show my colleague that it talks about the donation as anonymous, and they're not truly anonymous. They said it'll be anonymous on the page, so Joe Public wouldn't see that I gave, Paul money. But it says in here it says the organizer, the team, or the beneficiary would have the availability of a name of whoever done it, so they would know if it was a prohibited source.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just making a comment. I wasn't a question. Just my last comment. I want to thank the mayor for coming in and getting this guidance, because we presided over something just like this, of a gentleman that was playing kick the can for a whole bunch of years, even before I got up here. And it was about legal fees, and they came to a GoFundMe account, the very same thing. And what happened was there was a lot of prohibited individuals in there that he got money from while in office, and he didn't disclose it. And that's what got him in trouble. So when I say I appreciate, and I always, when I sit up here from governor's standpoint, no matter if it's a city councilman, a commissioner, a representative, always ask if they were provided legal counsel, and did they seek it? I always ask that, because normally they do provide that for those groups. And did they seek it, and did they follow it? And it's good to try to get an opinion ahead of time, instead of standing there with an attorney trying to reverse engineer it, saying it wasn't a gift, or it wasn't this, or it wasn't that, because as you can see, there's a lot of ambiguity in this, big time. So just a comment, I want to thank the mayor for that, because as you can see, there's a whole lot of ways to get in trouble. Thank you.
Mayor Lindsay, would you like to be heard? No pressure.
No pressure. Good job, Steve.
Good morning again. I simply came up here to say thank you. Thank you for all the good questions. I worried quite a lot when my friend made the offer, and I'm very grateful to the Ethics Commission staff and all their hard work to help me move forward in an appropriate way. So if you don't have any questions for me, then that's all I have to offer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Mayor, I want
Yes,
to
sir.
also commend you that even when I served in local government, and even in the state, I always got an opinion from my attorney. And also ultimately, from the Ethics Commission, when they started requiring us to take all this ethical training, because this is where you're going to end up at if you run a file. So this is the best place to get out of jail free letter or note if you have to come back this way. So again, I want to commend you for that, because normally we don't get that, and that's why we exist.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
all right, so we've got the proposed amendment from Steve to add the language. There's been the proposed addition of reference to a specific prime rate. So I guess now we should probably discuss how to move forward, whether we want to see an updated draft or whether there's a motion to just adopt it with those changes. One moment, please, Commissioner Akers.
I'll make an attempt, but I welcome the input of others on those issues. I just want to give us some sort of a framework from which to work. And that would be to not delay the delivery of the opinion. So whatever I say, I'm hopeful that we can offer enough specifics to the general counsel to be able to incorporate them with our approval today, so that the opinion can still be delivered as if it were fully adopted today. So my suggestions would be to not add the additional language. And my rough attempt at substituting something that would still accomplish the goals on the issue that I raised with respect to the anonymous donors would be on page 7, the last paragraph.
It's a good page, ain't it?
And that the second sentence would just be slightly modified to read as follows. Although a donor may elect to have his or her donation remain anonymous to the public, the identities of the donors must be visible to the beneficiary of the GoFundMe page for the gift to be accepted. And my second reference for the general counsel to insert where appropriate would be the specific reference to the bank loan interest rate or the prime.
I'll second it, but, in the footnote of the same page, it states that it is visible to the individual, the organization, and the team member. If someone set up a team, why it'll be anonymous to the public, but they'll always know who the donors are coming from. So I guess that's why you put the footnote, that paragraph. I'm just, in essence, not to slow it down. I think it's already there. See if I can speak.
Through the chair, just to be clear on the order of things, we did our research on this and before we put the draft up, and we thought we had covered the landscape, and we thought we wrote an opinion that covered it, and that's where that footnote comes. It quotes their website and the information that they give us. We have this other project going on where we've learned that there are some really clever people out there, and these clever people there's a clever way of getting around the tools that have been created, and that's unfortunately what's created this discussion here. So I did want to acknowledge that, and I think the language proposed does that with gusto. So I'm able to write that and not have.
That won't slow it down?
No.
Okay, I'm good.
I would agree with the strategy of moving forward and not delaying and proposing language so that we don't have to make the mayor wait any longer. I think that the suggestion of not making the addition that Steve proposed, that Commissioner Akers made, is all right, because I think at the end of the day, it's just reiterating the reasonable inquiry and the knowing acceptance standard, which is in the law, and so everyone's presumed to know that anyways. And so anyways, those are just, and the must be visible. I think that makes sense as well. So I'll go back to others for any additional discussion or questions. Sure.
Clarification, is accepting when it's received into GoFundMe, or is it when she deposits it from GoFundMe? And can she reject it? Could she go through all the anonymous ones if they've done some clever way and reject and send back, and then only deposit? Is that the acceptance? Where's the acceptance happen?
Stump the general counsel.
Impossible.
So what I'm asking is,
Stop the town, stop.
it's been, it's been at least a year since we did it, but the acceptance was in the donation was in one quarter, the withdrawal out of the account was in a different quarter, and there was a dispute over which quarter they were supposed to do the disclosure. My memory of it is the date that we used was the date that the money went into the GoFundMe account as the date for when the disclosure should have been made. I think the donor was using the other date. We did a prosecution on that, and I think we got the probable cause. So my answer on that would be, to be consistent with that, we should use the date that it goes in. And you can give a refund, but that's also built into the definition of a gift. A gift is that which is accepted, for which grave consideration is not given within 90 days. So they have 90 days to refund it, and that's built into the definition of gift. Anything that they refund escapes the definition of a gift if it's done within 90 days, and therefore wouldn't come into this whole analysis.
I think that it's a big deal. Because you could say you can't accept loans. On a bigger picture and a side note, but just to say now, I think this is something that maybe needs to be addressed somewhere, because I remember when I had a PayPal account trying to raise money for, and my treasurer forgot one time there was money in the PayPal account. It wasn't in my bank account, and when she was reconciling, everything looked great, but there was this PayPal over there. And so sometimes you don't take the money out, you just set it for funding, and then you deposit it, and so sometimes it looks like it's not adding up. So I think it's important to know when that's officially accepted in the bank account. I don't know that all elected officials understand it, because now there's more than PayPal, now there's Venmo, you know, all these things, and so there could be donations coming in from all these different places, but not actually being deposited in the bank.
And, you know, what we do with the gift law does not necessarily have to match what is happening in campaign finance or with political committees, because they have their own rules for that, and they have their own definitions for what, they don't even, it's not, my understanding is it's not a gift, it's a contribution, and there's a different definition for all of that, and so we're not bound by the norms of what's happening in Chapter 104 and 106 to finance campaigns and political committees.
Understood, but it's the same thing, and people send that amount of money or whatever, and it's not really a thing. It's just, we're getting into new territory. It's gifts and
Well, we will be discussing legislative recommendations later on the agenda, so maybe if, you know, if that's something that you can discuss at that time. Or at another meeting, because I think that's a second sort of suggestion, that there's lack of clarity or something needs to be updated. I know that the $100 cup of coffee was a joke, but, things to think about, things to think about. Okay.
Steve, you mentioned, and just some help for us, you mentioned clever individuals and ways of getting around. You know, and then, is there anything that, I mean, is the paragraph that we're proposing, will that help, or will that, I'm just looking at reverse engineering, because if they can do it, we can, you know, make a way that we can undo it, or make it be visible for disclosure purposes. I'm just curious, as we go with these kinds.
Yeah, there's a method by which somebody could make the donation not only anonymous to the administrator of the fund or to the public, but also anonymous to GoFundMe itself. And so, you know, that GoFundMe can only give you, as the administrator of a crowdsourced fundraising campaign, it can only give you the information that it has access to. And so there's a method by which an individual could not provide GoFundMe with honest information. And so that's what this discussion has been trying to acknowledge, is that they have information on their website, which, taken at face value, seems to indicate the administrator will always have the information about who the donor is, but in reality, the administrator is only going to have the information that GoFundMe has access to.
Now, to that end, you're not walking up handing these people, you know, silver coins or a pound of flesh or cash. They're using digital payments through credit cards, if you will. It has to be approved before they even put that amount on your account, if it's a contribution, donation, or whatever. But if it's declined, it won't make it into your, won't even make it on the page. So, I mean, to that end, when they say they don't have information, I mean, you can't charge my credit card without my name, my zip code, where I live, and all that. So I'm wondering if that's true when they say they don't have the information of who's doing what.
I can't get into what the methodology is, because that other project is not ready to be discussed in this forum. But I would say that I dispute the premise that all forms of payment to GoFundMe would be, that the identity would be known. And so it is, I'm 100% sure that it is possible to shield the identity of who's making a digital payment from GoFundMe.
Right, is there, so I don't, someone remind me, was it a motion and a second for on your language?
Second motion.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Well, any other discussion, any other questions? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Happy drafting.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Okay.
They're all about just like that.
All right, moving on to item 7, this is financial disclosure appeals. We'll begin with 2 in which a hearing was requested. First will be FD 21-019, In re John Lee Dizon, and I apologize if I mispronounced that name. So this is a consideration of that appeal of the automatic fine assessed for the failure to timely file an annual disclosure form. So is the appellant or their counsel in attendance?
Mr. Dizon, are you present?
Good, all right.
Okay. I promise you that this is just how the assignments fell. I'm not trying to be up here all the time. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, we are here for a hearing on the financial disclosure appeal of John Lee Dizon. For the benefit of Commissioner Bain, I'll explain a little bit about what this process is. The Commission on Ethics oversees the state's financial disclosure program. Financial disclosure forms are due by July 1 every year, and there's a penalty-free grace period for filing up until September 1. After September 1, fines accrue at the rate of $25 per day to a maximum of $1,500. We call these automatic fines because they're imposed automatically unless they're appealed. To successfully appeal these fines, an appellant must show that unusual circumstances prevented the timely filing of the financial disclosure form. Unusual circumstances is defined in our rule. We define it as uncommon, rare, or sudden events over which the reporting individual had no control and which directly result in the failure to act in accordance with the filing requirements. Circumstances which allow for time in which to take those steps necessary to assure compliance with the filing requirements shall be deemed not to constitute unusual circumstances. So with that, we have the appeal of, and it's Mr. Dizon first, correct?
Yes.
So with that, we have the appeal of Mr. Dizon. John Lee Dizon is or in the year 2020, was a member of the Downtown Action Committee in West Palm Beach. Because of that, in 2021, he was required to file a 2020 CE Form 1. He filed that form 5 days late and incurred a fine of $125. When he appealed the fine, he indicated on the appeal form that he was prevented from filing due to a lack of notification of his filing requirement. In the appeal, he specified that he resigned from the board in 2021 and was no longer a resident of West Palm Beach, so he did not receive the mailings. As corroboration for his position on that, he supplied a resignation email that he had sent to the board announcing his move from Palm Beach County to Broward County. The email is dated June 2, 2021. It's on page 7 of your materials for this matter. Also, as corroboration, we see in the materials that Palm Beach County Supervisor of Election did send the notices to the West Palm Beach address, not to him in Broward County. So it appears that he did not receive notification of his filing requirement when it had been mailed. I recommend that you waive the fine due to unusual circumstances.
Any discussion, questions? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Moving on to consideration of the appeal of the automatic fine in FD 21-041 in Ray Sherry Schobert. Is the appellant or their counsel in attendance in this matter? All right, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, Sherry Schobert, in the year 2020, was a member of the Human Relations Board of Broward County. Being a member of that board, she was required to file in 2021, she was required to file the 2020 CE Form 1. She filed it 16 days late and incurred a $400 penalty. She specified in her appeal that she had mailed the form to the supervisor of elections several times. It's corroboration for her statement that she had attempted to mail it several times timely. She supplied us a copy of the form that she mailed timely, or attempted to mail timely. The form is dated June 23rd, 2021, which is a timely date, before July 1 of that year. She also received notices saying that her form had not been filed, and she attempted to refile a copy of the form several times, according to her, and she did that by mail. I'm recommending waiving this fine because it appears that unusual circumstances prevented the timely filing. The appellant appears to have attempted to mail it several times, but something outside the appellant's control appears to have prevented the delivery of those forms through the mail. I'm not aware of any concrete basis for disputing her claims. And with that, I recommend that we waive.
Second.
Questions, discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right. Now we will turn to the matters where no hearing was requested under item 7 on the agenda, which are also appeals from automatic fines for failure to timely file annual disclosure forms. So none of the listed appellants under this section of the agenda requested to be heard, so there'll be no oral presentation on the content of these appeals unless a member requests it. So are there any of these appeals that any member wants to set aside for presentation by staff, or any disclosures that need to be made on the record? Are there any questions on any of these appeals? All right. Is there a motion to entertain all of the no hearing matters as a group?
Make a motion for items 1 through 17.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right. Next, item 8 is consideration of rulemaking. So we have 2 rule hearings on our agenda today. Purpose of the public hearing is to allow the commission to hear public comment, evidence, and argument about the proposed rule or proposed changes to an existing rule. So following the public hearing, the commission will decide whether to make any changes in response to public comments or written materials received, or whether to accept the rule as noticed. The commission may withdraw a rule in whole or in part, or make such changes as are supported by the record of the public hearing or any written materials we've received. The commission may also make technical changes which do not affect the substance of the rule. I'll ask Gray, who prepared the draft items, to explain the rule changes and put us in the proper posture, and then we'll proceed with the public hearing, deliberation, and vote.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, this first series of rule amendments pertain to rules in Chapter 34-5 of the Administrative Code. That's a rule chapter that, among other things, has rules that set out the procedures for how the Commission should handle and process ethics complaints. The rule chapter itself is made up of about 25 individual rules. The rulemaking in front of you in this particular hearing concerns amending 2 of those rules. Now, these amendments are necessary based on a bill that was passed during this past legislative session and that was signed into law by the governor in June. That bill is Senate Bill 7014. I know you all are all aware of different subsections in it. One of the changes that it made to the ethics laws, though, is that a complaint can now only be investigated, an allegation and a complaint, if it's based on personal knowledge or information other than hearsay. That is a change that was made by Senate Bill 7014 that needs to now be reflected on our procedural rules about how we handle complaints. The rule in question here is Rule 34-5.002. That particular rule sets out the specific processes for how complaints should be handled as they work their way through the Commission. So the changes here, which are meant to reflect this statutory amendment in Senate Bill 7014, We'll clarify first, just in general, that an allegation must be based on personal knowledge or information other than hearsay to be investigated. Second, what we're proposing is to clarify that each element of the statute to be investigated must meet that standard, meaning each element must be based on personal information or information other than hearsay, except for elements related to mental intent. Third, we're proposing using language from a case in the 4th District Court of Appeals, clarifying exactly when an allegation will be considered to be based on information other than hearsay. We're using language right from that court decision. Then finally, the changes indicate that a complaint can be investigated even if certain allegations are based on personal knowledge or information other than hearsay, but other allegations might not meet that standard. What we would do in that instance, according to the rules, we'd parse it. We would just investigate the allegations that are based on personal information or information other than hearsay, and we would not investigate, we would dismiss the allegations that don't meet that standard. That's the first change we need to make in this rule chapter to reflect what Senate Bill 7014 did. The other change, though, concerns the area of attorney's fees. That rule is found in Rule 34-5.0291. Now, prior to Senate Bill 7014, what the law said is that a public officer or a public employee named as a respondent in an ethics complaint could petition for reasonable attorney's fees and costs. The Commission made a recommendation, I believe, to the legislature during this past legislative session, which was accepted and worked its way into Senate Bill 7014, to also allow candidates named as respondents in ethics complaints to petition for fees and costs. So we just need to go back in, because that's now the law of the land, we need to go back into this particular rule on attorney's fees and indicate in 2 separate places that candidates can also file a fees petition as well. The full language of these changes, these 2 rules, have been provided to you in your meeting materials. If you have questions about the language, I'd be glad to address them. I will say as well, these changes are all publicly noticed in the Florida Administrative Register, which we have to do whenever we have a new rule or rule amendment. All of this language has also been timely provided about 3 weeks ago to JAPC, which is the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee. The acronym is JAPC. JAPC is a state agency that reviews all proposed rules and rule amendments to make sure the agency has authority for each change that they're proposing. Like I said, we sent that to JAPC about 3 weeks ago. They have had no feedback for us, which I take it to mean that they're comfortable with what we're recommending. So I submit these changes to you now, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Well, is there anybody, I guess, so before we get into any questions, and I have several, is there anybody from the public who wants to be heard on either of these rules, since this is a public hearing? Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, there's the language that says that it obviously has to be based on the knowledge of the person signing the complaint, or the personal knowledge of the individuals who authorized the signing of the complaint. Could you explain how we would determine, or I guess staff would determine, whether the person who authorized signing the complaint and whether that person has personal knowledge?
Sure. Just for the benefit of full commission, this doesn't happen very often, but our statute does say, in general, a complaint has to be filed by just an individual, signing and notarizing the complaint on their own. But our statutes do allow for like an incorporated entity or some type of association that's incorporated to file a complaint and have someone sign the complaint and notarize it as an authorized representative of that association or group. It happens maybe once or twice a year. What we would need to do, to your point, Chair, is we would have to have information in that complaint that either the person who authorized it or the individuals at the association or group who authorized that person to file it had personal knowledge of the allegations raised, or there'd have to be some explanation of the complaint to be able to show that the allegations based on information other than hearsay in order for it to be investigated. So we would have to look at the language of the complaint itself to verify that.
Does anybody have questions on that point before I ask another question? Okay. So the rule incorporates statutory hearsay exceptions under the evidence code, which obviously makes a lot of sense. If if the order to investigate, finding legal sufficiency is making the determination that there is hearsay, that it's based on hearsay, but that an exception applies, will that analysis, or at least that conclusion of what exception applies, be articulated in the order to investigate so that the respondents know?
Yes, Chair. We would, I think what we've done whenever we have a complaint now is we have a paragraph explaining whether it's based on personal information or information other than hearsay before we move on then to address it and kind of analyze it. I would anticipate in that paragraph, if a hearsay exception were to apply, we would fully describe that and explain why.
Okay. Do you think that that is required by the rule as written?
Well, I don't know that the rule as written specifically specifies what we need to put in our order to investigate. We don't go down in the rule to that granular level of detail, but that would certainly be, our practice.
Yes.
Madam Chair, if I may, because this requirement is written into, it's amending the legal sufficiency portion of the statute, in order to establish that we've got legal sufficiency to investigate, we will need to demonstrate in the order that we think that this requirement is not a bar
Okay.
to investigating. We will need to make some sort of acknowledgement in the direction of personal knowledge or information other than hearsay to
Okay.
establish that we've looked at the complaint on that basis.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Those are the only questions I had. Sure, Commissioner.
Just for the public watching, these are, you're just amending the current rules per the laws that were signed into law by, the bills that were signed into law by the governor.
That's
that
correct.
Reflect the law of the land today forward.
That's correct. During this past legislative session, Senate Bill 7014 was passed by the legislature. The governor signed it into law in June. If we didn't update our rules to reflect what the statutes currently say, our rules would be inaccurate. So we're just catching up our rules here to reflect the current state of the law following Senate Bill 7014.
Now, to that end, through the chair, these are not retroactive. So if you got cases pending that happened before this bill was signed, they won't be subject to this.
That's correct. The law went into effect, I forget the exact day in June, but these would just be applicable from that date forward.
I believe there was a motion in a second. Did I make that up?
I motion, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
There
know,
was a second.
I know it's procedural because she had to do the public comment, but you did make a motion.
Sure.
Oh,
Please,
yes, yes.
by all means.
His last statement as well as the staff statement. Mark Herron, on behalf of the public, so to speak, or those interested in the process here. There was a brief discussion as to whether these amendments were retroactive. I think that that's an open question that may be brought in different proceedings. I recognize the position of the staff on that, but again, I think there may be an issue that they are retroactive. And I'll tell you why if you like. I mean, no, there's a case involving the Florida Elections Commission where they changed the ability of the commission to investigate complaints. That was deemed to be by a court in the second district to be a procedural change that affected the ability of the commission to investigate and prosecute cases that were filed, investigated, and brought before the law went into effect. So there is a question.
Okay. And I guess, that question is something that's going to have to be sussed out irrespective of what the language that we're voting on today is.
Exactly.
Okay.
100%.
Okay, as long as we're all in agreement on that, okay. Thank you, Mr. Herron. Is there anybody else that wants to be heard? Mr. Lebaski?
Sorry.
I'm just joking. I just saw you back there. Motion in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Is there a second?
There was a second, yeah. I'm sorry? Oh, golly gee, I forgot that there's a second rule. Okay. Now, that was part of the opening presentation, right, on the,
That would have been the first rule hearing on the amendments to Chapter 34-5. The second rule
Okay.
hearing concerns amendments to Chapter 34-17.
okay. Well, is there anybody here on Rule 3417 that'd like to be heard?
Well, I haven't made my presentation on 34-17 either, just.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, as I said, this next series of rule amendments all pertain to rules in Chapter 34-17 of the Administrative Code. Now, the last rule, Chapter 34-5, dealt with ethics complaints. The rules in Chapter 34-17 deal with how the Commission handles ethics referrals. Again, Chapter 34-17 has several different individual rules, about 19 of them, clarifying how referrals should be handled. And just like with the last rule hearing, I think we need to make some changes here because of Senate Bill 7014 and the different amendments that it made regarding our referral statutes. And I think the easiest way of working through the changes here, and they're fairly straightforward, is just to tell you how referrals had their way of working through our process in the past, and then clarify the changes that Senate Bill 7014 made in this process. So our referral law is Section 112.324, authorizes the Commission to take referrals from certain public agencies like the governor, FDLE, or a state attorney or U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, unlike complaints, though, which the law used to say had to be sent to respondents within 5 days of receiving the complaint in our office at the Commission, the law used to say the first stop for referrals, instead of sending the referral out to the respondent, was to have the Commission's executive director review its allegations and make a recommendation to you all during an executive session meeting as to whether any of the allegations were provided a legally sufficient basis for investigation. Critically, what the law required was at least 6 commissioners agree, based on the executive director's recommendation, that a referral was legally sufficient for investigation before any investigation could be conducted. If we didn't reach that magic 6 commissioner number, the referral would be dismissed. But if 6 of you did agree, we would then prepare an order to investigate on the referral, and it would proceed just like a normal complaint. So up until this point, that's been the process, and that's what was reflected in the rules in Chapter 34-17. Now fast forward to Senate Bill 7014. It made some changes in the referral statutes. Those changes in this particular part of 7014 are set to go into effect on October 1st, which makes our rulemaking today very timely. One of the things Senate Bill 7014 did was it eliminated the requirement that 6 members of the Commission have to approve the referral for investigation. And now it just says a preliminary investigation can be undertaken if the referral itself is legally sufficient, meaning if the executive director on her own finds the allegations in the referral a sufficient basis for investigation, it can be investigated without running it past you all. And the Senate bill also indicates that starting October 1st, the Commission should no longer wait until an investigation is ordered before sending the copy of the referral to the respondent. It now says that copy has to be sent within 5 days of receiving the referral itself. If you look at the staff analysis of this bill, it explains the justification for these changes, which is to bring the referral process completely in alignment with how complaints are handled. Complaints are sent within 5 days of receipt. The executive director is able to order an investigation of a complaint on her own. The legislature wanted to make referrals reflect that as well. And the bill analysis doesn't indicate this necessarily, but I also think it's worth noting that another reason for this may be that starting in October, referrals and complaints are going to be subject to the same accelerated deadlines. That means the Commission only has 30 days from the date the complaint or referral is received to decide whether or not a preliminary investigation should be conducted. So speed is going to be very important going forward. And if we had to wait for 6 members of the Commission to find the referral legally sufficient for investigation, that could take us outside the 30-day window because the Commission just meets every 6 weeks. So if we got a referral, Monday morning, 3 days from now, we'd have to wait 6 weeks before we could present it to you all, and that would take us outside that 30-day window. So that, as context, the changes in front of you to the rules in 34-17 propose indicating that a copy of the referral needs to be sent to the respondent within 5 days of receiving it, and removes any reference to the requirement that at least 6 members of the commission have to approve the allegations in a referral for an investigation to be conducted. We're just reflecting what Senate Bill 7014 says. Full language of those changes has been provided to you, and as before, we have noticed these in the administrative register. We provided them to JAPSI. JAPSI has not had any feedback for us. So I submit these changes to you now. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Anybody have,
Motion to accept.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? There's nobody here. And I apologize because I had confused the fee piece of the last rule and thought it was a part of this rule, and so I thought that we'd covered them together, so I apologize for the procedural confusion. Find my calling card. Yeah, no. I'm glad it wasn't just me. Okay. All right. Next, we will move on to consideration and discussion of what will become our 2025 legislative recommendations. So we've got a memo in our materials outlining last year's recommendations, and today we'll decide what 2024 recommendations, if any, we wish to keep for next session. Members may have additional items we wish to have staff add or research for discussion in our next meeting. And ideally, we would take up our final consideration and adoption of legislative recommendations at our October meeting. So before we begin, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this? Next, I'll ask Carrie to briefly go over the items from last year as a starting point for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, you have the list of recommendations from last year in your material. A couple of these have been on the list for many years. So as I work through them, I'll try to provide a little information on background as well as you consider possible recommendations for the 2025 session. The conflict of interest recommendation essentially looks to close a loophole in the law in terms of how the law applies, where although they cannot have employment or a contractual relationship with an entity that's regulated by or doing business with their agency, they could create a corporation that could then do business with an entity that is doing business with their agency. The Commission first proposed this change in 2014. It has not been enacted into law, although the legislature from time to time has touched on 313 sub 7. Nothing has gotten traction. Next on the list is voting conflicts. The Commission, since 2007, has recommended that the law be amended to prohibit local elected officials from participating in a matter where they have a voting conflict without first disclosing their conflict. So, as the law stands, they can currently work to persuade their colleagues right up until the time for the vote. Only then are they required to announce their conflict, abstain, and ultimately file that voting conflict memorandum. If this recommendation were to become law at some point, then local elected officials would have the same voting conflict requirements that currently apply to local appointed officers, where they must announce their conflict, disclose their conflict before any attempt to participate on the issue and prior to abstaining from the vote. Then in 2009, the Commission added a recommendation that they wanted to make the voting conflict law the same for state and local officials, whether or not they were appointed or elected. Currently, state officers can vote even with a voting conflict if the vote provides a special private gain or loss to the relative employer or business associate. They simply must file the voting conflict memorandum when they vote. The state officials must abstain from voting only when they will personally experience a special private gain or loss because of the vote. The legislature obviously has not passed this. There certainly has been very little appetite in terms of making the state and local standards the same. That brings me to whistleblower protections. This was something you all added in 2021. The Commission recommended that the legislature consider extending whistleblower status or some sort of protection to employees who might seek to file valid ethics complaints, but might be fearful of adverse personnel actions, and so they don't file those complaints. So that's been there since 2021. It has not been picked up by the legislature. Last year, then you added salary withholding to your list of recommendations for the first time. This is salary withholding for the payment of civil penalties associated with complaint violations. And this was something that the advocates asked that you consider last year, and you took them up on that. Adding salary withholding would be very helpful to them. It's a cost-effective tool for easy collection of civil penalties. This salary withholding is a tool that already exists in the law related to the automatic fines for failure to file financial disclosure, those $25 a day fines, which are different than the civil penalties that the advocates collect on behalf of the state of Florida. It served its purpose in terms of automatic fine collections, and the advocates have asked that that be added to their toolbox. The other recommendations that you, the last but not least is the recommendation that you asked that the legislature clarify that individuals appointed to a Form 6 elective office be required to file the Form 6. That is consistent with how the commission has interpreted the law. We share your recommendations to the House and Senate leadership and the Ethics Oversight Committees. These recommendations also become a part of the annual report that we provide to the legislature, to the leadership in January. And for the past number of years, you've also included a couple of items where you were stating opposition to concepts that had appeared in bills in prior years. The bills related to representation were coming to life at the very end of session, where it made it difficult for the commission to act or have input. The gift issue came up several years ago. That was the only session that we saw that. But the commission at that time had stated its opposition. So whether or not you want to include opposition as a part of your recommendations is, of course, at your discretion. Whether or not you decide to actively lobby any of your recommendations that you make as a part of your legislative recommendations this year, it would be helpful if you chose to authorize one of the members to act as a legislative liaison to speak on behalf of the commission. Having a commissioner speak is always more powerful than just Steve or I. We act as the commission's official legislative lobbyists during session. Any number of proposals arise during session that affect the ethics laws that may not have been proposed by the commission. And we only have a couple of meetings during legislative session. So it's very tough for us to be agile in response to things that are filed. So what generally happens is that I speak during committee meetings when appropriate as to the implementation of the proposed bills. I provide analysis of those bills when prompted by the legislature. I provide input to staff about implementation, as does Steve. He will also appear at meetings. We try to split up that responsibility during legislative session. I will sometimes get asked, has the commission taken a position on this bill? And generally the answer to that is no, that we're only speaking to information that the commission has not taken this up as a body, but they do ask. So if you were to authorize someone to speak on your behalf, if that person felt it appropriate, they may be able to take a position on your behalf, understanding that you all would not have been able to vote that position into effect, but you would have previously authorized the member to do that. So with that, I will turn it over to you all. We always actively monitor the bills and keep you posted. It's clearly been active sessions the last few years, and we are busy implementing those changes and preparing to implement the rest of the changes come October 1st. And I look forward to your discussion and guidance as to what your priorities might be.
Does anybody want to kick off discussion of what to move forward with, maybe what to remove from the list? Okay, sure, Commissioner
The two cheddar
Deskovich.
boxes, as always. I have a question about the salary withholding. Is that, I don't even know if it's possible, is that any employment salary or is that their government job salary? And could we differentiate from that?
Through the chair. I believe the salary withholding, and Kim's here at the end of the table, I believe it is with government positions that we can do the salary withholding. That is correct. It's with the government employment or salaries.
So I might be in the minority on this, but I tend to think that, you know, and this isn't a commentary on the substance of, from a policy position of any of the recommendations, but it sounds like most of these are things that were just voted on a long time ago and they've just been holdovers, and I think that probably dilutes the effectiveness. And so I wonder if anyone would have interest in maybe coming up with a winnowed down list of recommendations, and sort of taking things off that have been there for several years or aren't responsive to current bills being proposed, or just a sort of, you know, quality over quantity approach. Not that there's lack of quality, but is that something that anybody else has a reaction to or opinions about?
I don't disagree with you. I think that's probably a good idea. If we had one or two, if we just, I don't know what's been done in the past, you know, I think it might be here, we were trying to figure that out, but, you know, if we really want these across the finish line, there has to be an effort to find a bill sponsor, to bug them about it, to, you know, find co-sponsor. There has to be, like, somebody has to be focused on it, and I don't know that our executive director was the time. I think that's why you recommended one of us maybe step up and do something like that. And so, less is better in that area. If we've got one or two or three that we're super passionate about and that we could actually take the time to go back to find legislators that would sponsor and hear, it's way more impactful. And the next year you pick up a couple more of them.
Yeah, I mean, the two that stuck out to me, just for purposes of discussion, I'm not making a motion, but are, you know, I think the salary withholding, I guess that was just added last year at y'all's recommendation. So that's sort of new. But the other one that I think is timely, the whistleblower protection is one that we talked about last year, and I made a fuss about it, and I sent Steve on a homework assignment, sorry. But because of the heightened standard for personal knowledge and information other than hearsay, I think that the whistleblower protection recommendation is timely. Those are the two that stand out to me as potential keepers. I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts, or, sure, Commissioner Newton. Commissioner Newton?
Oh, I was just gonna suggest that we probably pick up what we left off at. You touched on a bit of it with the whistleblower. The rules that were just applied are part of what we did, what we're doing now. Am I right, Madam Chair? So it's what it means. The rules that we just implemented that were signed into law were recommendations from this panel, previous panel that went forth, and the legislature picked them up. They went through the process and the governor signed them. What we just did with the implementation of the rule change.
Through the chair, some of the rule changes, the one related to costs and fees, was something that was recommended by you last year. The other rule changes, personal information other than hearsay, those related rules were not a part of your legislative recommendations, but were policy choices of the legislature.
What I was saying was that we build on what we had, because they took the one in about first-hand knowledge, so no one would have that with somebody who would have something to risk. Hence, the whistleblower protection. That's where I'm going with that. And as to the other ones, I see that we had a couple that were, he needed opposition included with the recommendation from last year. So I guess the representing one's client before he's on board and the gift expenditure compensation from lobbies. Those two were not considered. Some information on that they didn't touch on. So what I'm trying to say is that we got to look at what's amenable to this legislature, what it would do. I mean, you know what I'm saying? We can send all we want, but if it's something they don't have an appetite for, you know, obviously gift was gonna be tough because you got 162 of my colleagues over there that they get gifts. And they're gonna put more rules on themselves. But the other one, the whistleblower one, I think will be, probably be number one for me, and then the other would be, I guess if you really vote on for its priority. I think, conflict of interest and voting conflict, I think they're almost one and the same. You ask me, conflict. So really, if you one of those down, you would have two. You would have the whistleblower and then whatever conflict we came up with as a recommendation. That would be two suggestions. That's just my take on legislative point of view.
Do what?
I don't have,
I just said, I like these.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, you want to win them down. I'm saying
Sure.
you gotta, basically you got a conflict and you got whistleblower protection.
Right, I just want to make sure I wasn't cutting you off, because I had turned my back.
So you got two, is what I'm saying. So you got your widow. It's just how do we want to approach the conflict?
Commissioner Akers?
I'll make an effort at maybe refining this, because several years ago, I also believed that just having a couple of priorities would be more effective. And there were so many former legislators on the commission that they didn't agree. So I'm so glad that now there are some people that maybe think that that will simplify and focus our interest. I don't have strong opinions on which of those there are, but I think because they are more fresh and new, that I would recommend that in our annual report, we include recommendations as stated in the memo from staff today that deal with salary withholding and the whistleblower protection, and that we, although not actively lobby, have available Commissioner Lucas to serve as liaison to the extent any responses are needed or communications need to be had with the legislature during session, and that we be available to reconsider our opposition to proposed bills that may arise between now and when they are considered on the floor.
Second.
Well,
She lives up here. She don't-
right, this is just, I'm just being penalized for living in Tallahassee.
I was ready to vote on that component.
Call the question.
Okay, so I guess, to the extent that I think, and I do think we actually voted on that part last year, and that's, I'm fine with that. I know, so is the action that we're taking today is let's, like, come back with a winnowed list and vote on it next time, or do we want to vote on a winnowed list today?
My suggestion was the winnowed list is salary withholding and whistleblower protection, and that be included as our recommendations in the annual report.
Okay.
So you don't have to revisit it, unless there are changed circumstances that could arise between now and when session begins.
Okay. So that comports with, I think, the same thought that I had, but that does not include sort of a hybrid of the conflicts.
And the only reason I left that off is because I think it's been around longer. I was only trying to
Right.
find the
Right,
ones that
right.
might be more fresh. And if I'm wrong about that, please correct me. I don't feel strongly about it. I'm just trying to achieve the objective of focus.
Okay.
But the rationale of my second would be the whistleblower, because you're gonna need that now that you have the firsthand knowledge. And then, the salary, would be like a stick, because not only will they get in trouble, but now it's gonna cost them some money that we can actually readily get without waiting for payment. I don't know what their repayment rate is on these fines that we levy. I mean, this one will be one of them, because it'll come out when you get paid.
So then, is there, well, for any other discussion, any other thoughts, feelings? Is there a second on,
I think,
oh, did you make a second?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want you in there. I mean, you got, what, a 2-minute commute to the Capitol?
It's like 12 minutes. It's oppressive. Okay.
You can never escape.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. All opposed?
I love my colleagues, but I want to talk about it.
I know, it's fine.
may I
Oh.
take the floor for just a second?
Yes.
Before we get to the next issue. We had, at the beginning of this meeting, a acknowledgement that this is the 50th anniversary of the commission. So that seemed to help me go down memory lane, and I reflected on what happened approximately just a year ago, but one day might be part of bigger history, when this commission sort of departed from the tradition of having the dean or the longest-serving member of the commission serve as the chair. And at the outset of the meeting, Commissioner Figurs made a motion, if I recall correctly, and I haven't looked at the minutes, to nominate Commissioner Lucas at her second meeting to become the chair. And it was a very close vote, 5-4, 4-3, based on, I think, somebody voting for somebody who was very experienced versus somebody who was new to the commission. And Commissioner Lucas was elected chair at her second meeting. And during today's meeting, I know she wondered, I asked her if she ever took ballet, and she has no idea why. But I was thinking, because she was sitting at the very far left of this dais, and when she was elected, it didn't work exactly like it is right now. It was the beginning of the meeting. And she looked to me like somebody who was at her second dance class and then was asked to be the prima ballerina on the stage. And she did it with that exact same grace that a ballerina at the front of the stage is called upon to have. And that is, if you don't know, that when they go up on those point shoes, they're made of wood at the bottom. And it is extremely challenging to put your toes in the crunched position and stand up. It requires extraordinary strength and unique grace. And I feel like that's what Commissioner Lucas has exhibited as she has served us in this position. And she showed that balance, one, through her knowledge of the process, even though she was new to the commission, and she balanced that with engaging on the issues of substance. And she showed that balance by showing that authority as chair, but also in reflecting humility. And if it wasn't a restriction of law to have someone serve 2 consecutive terms as chair, I would nominate you again. But instead, on behalf of the commission, I just want to say thank you, and we will present you with this plaque to remember.
Is this a gift?
I was dying to see what was inside.
On behalf of the public and on behalf of this commission, thank you, Commissioner Lucas, for serving as our chair.
That is really, really cool.
I've been asked to do this.
That was super surprising, and I am not often accused of being graceful, so I really appreciate that, and thank you all for fellow commissioners, staff, endless patience, good humor, and tolerance, and it's been a pleasure, a privilege. I had prepared some remarks, but I'm frankly tired of hearing myself talk. So, thank you all very much. As has now been previewed, the term of the commission chair is limited to a year, so it's time to pass the gavel to the new chair. So our last order of business is to take nominations for the selection of a new chair and vice chair.
I'm going to be like Commissioner Figurs. I'm going to jump out on top of that dais and make a motion. Although there are good options, many and several, I'm happy to say, good options for chair, I am going to nominate Commissioner Fuste to serve as the chair.
Second. Are there any other nominations?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate somebody else.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Congratulations.
Not as graceful as you, Madam
You
Chair.
were a cop.
Even though I don't mind standing in ballet shoes if it requires,
Well, what you do in your private life is up to you.
He was a cop for 30 years. He can handle it.
Um,
Are you still the chair? Question. Can the vice chair be chair reappointed for another year, or is that?
That was going to be my exact question.
Okay, that's my question.
Through the chair, Steve, there's not a limitation in statute as to vice chair, correct?
No, I'm normally so prepared.
We should change the legislative recommendations to.
The law speaks, the law speaks to the chair and the term of the chair. It's silent as to vice chair.
I believe that is 100% correct. It says that the limit of the statute limits the term of the chair to 1 year.
All right.
Can I make a motion?
Yep.
And also a few words. I think our new chair is going to do a great job, but I would probably assume that you were able to do such a wonderful job as chair because you had a vice chair that is so experienced and knowledgeable and also graceful.
Amen.
So our new chair also hasn't been here terribly long, so I'm assuming he's also going to need a strong vice chair that's experienced. So I would like to recommend that Commissioner Akers serves a continued term on such a term.
Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Thank you.
seventh.
I'll prop you up.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. Would you like to adjourn our meeting as your first official act? I would move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Please join us for cake out in the rotunda,
Oh, yeah, cake.
commissioners. Yes, thank you.